I was thinking about get myself up here. What was I thinking about this morning? I was thinking about let's not do that right now. Thinking about this right here. And this strange statement, it's an example of Paul saying something that we would never say this way. Right here. Right somewhere. 10. Sorry, I'm in the wrong chapter. His statement on what he previously called the word of faith, the word of faith. Where's that at? Blah, 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 blah. The word right here, the word of faith, ambiguous, and then he simply states it that if you confess with your mouth Jesus as Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And I don't think there's anybody in this room, including me, who, if you, at least prior to studying Acts, would have formulated a gospel statement like this in one sentence. These people were masters at saying things sharply and densely, and this is an example of it. But what makes this strange from a Protestant standpoint is there's no reference to the death of Jesus. And in the Protestant world, that's kind of a no-no. It gets subsumed under the resurrection. And so, you know, you're probably tired of seeing the slide, but this is my understanding of the gospel message, the gospel proclamation in Acts. It's pretty consistent across all the speakers of the gospel. Really, there's only two, Paul and Peter. Stephen has a little one. Although it's not really a gospel presentation, it's just simply a recitation of the history of Israel, finished off with a scathing accusation against the Jews that were holding him. But anyway, this is the proclamation in Acts. And Paul seems to, encapsulate it with his statement about Jesus as Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. And so I assume that's what he was looking for from the people he preached the gospel to, Jews and Gentiles. But that final enthronement of Christ after his vindication through the resurrection, it's his enthronement and then his final victory, which we still await at some point in the future, which we will participate in and which we proclaim until that day, is his encapsulation of the gospel, the good news, the gospel message. Death is not necessarily good news, but the vindication of God's Messiah through the resurrection and his exaltation and God's final victory through him when he takes his place on this earth, that is good news. And we not only will participate in it then, but we already anticipate it and participate in it in this life as we sit here today. And so we can rejoice in that. We can thank God for that. No matter what else happens in the world, we have that as a sure and steadfast hope. Made possible, of course, through the all-sufficient, effective death of Christ on our behalf. But this is interesting because this proclamation here is Christ-centered. It's a Christ-centered proclamation. It's about him from the start until the finish. He's calling upon the nations to embrace a new king. And in embracing that new king, that king then becomes the focus. And you can see that in this proclamation.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Okay, you're talking about all those that is statements in verse 6, 7, and 8.
6, 7, and 8. Yeah.
Okay, but that those are added. Those aren't in the original text.
Yeah, they are. What makes you say that? What makes you say that?
Because mine are in parentheses. Usually that means they've been added.
Parentheses mean the author in it. The parentheses mean in English, we don't know how to handle this kind of sentence where there's no punctuation. There's no punctuation in Greek, no periods, no commas, no parentheses, no side comment, no way of,
Understood that those were added later.
added later would be brackets. In doubt would be brackets. For this reason and others, I always bring my Metzger. So we'll take a look at, what Mike is getting at right here is this, all it does is, in my view, all these parentheses do is create confusion. I mean, who decides that something in the word of God is in parentheses? I mean, I guess you have to a certain extent. But probably more appropriate would be a dash dash. That is to bring dash dash. You know, something that the idea that something is breaking up the thought of the what do you call it? The moving forwardness of the sentence, the flow of the sentence. He's breaking the flow of the sentence up and giving commentary on something, and then he's getting back to the flow of sentence, which is why so much of Paul can be confusing. But then it begs the question, is that really true, or do those parentheses mean a disputed text or something like that? So if I go to, if anybody has a written word, you should be able to go down. If they're commenting, it should be in brackets down below if it's a disputed text. Particularly in the New American Standard. But let me just look at 10 or 11. 10. Yeah, there's no he doesn't comment on those verses at all. And if we go to the Greek text and see if there's any dispute about it here. You guys can stop me at any time, but you are in my wheelhouse right now. It pays to be able to say something about this when it comes up. Versus what is that? 6, 7, and 8, 6 and 7. Yeah, there are no disputed phrases or words. There is no commentary on those, on any of the, it goes from 5 to 8. And there's nothing marked off in 6 or 7 in any way, indicating that it would be something to call attention to. So we can talk about it later, but I just think these parentheses do this. They just add confusion. Let's see what, let's go to another one. Let's see what the NIV did. They did the same thing. ESV. They did the same thing. I don't understand. We could go to the Message, but that'll just make me.
Yeah. So in the Greek, the way they speak doesn't do that.
No, but it just, there's no punctuation. There's simply the letters and the spaces. And English is very reliant, even on capitalization and sentence structure and where the period is, you know, where the comma is. Commas make a big difference in English. And they have a lot of trouble sometimes knowing where to put the commas so that the English mind can understand it. You know, it's just the way English is.
So you're saying all the stuff in the parentheses is in the Greek. But it's just.
Yeah. His point is there's a technique in translation. You can find it if you go to John, the woman at the yeah, you'll see it there. You should be able to see that's.
I didn't put it in this one, I just looked.
Really?
But I know that's kind of the original text.
And then in the end of Mark, after verse 16:9, you should see it there too, marked off.
And I didn't,
But-
yeah, I looked at John chapter 8,
Yeah.
I don't, anything.
But that's what they're, if we encounter one of those coming up, I'll point it out, but that's what he's getting at.
So in my little legend from where I got an NASB, there isn't even anything for parentheses, so you just have to assume it's part of the text. Because,
The parentheses says an English translator saying,
yeah,
I don't know how to work this into English, but he's making a side point. And then he's breaking up his thought. This is how you do it in English. You put it in parentheses. if I have a sentence and then, oh, by the way, today is Tuesday, and then I get back to my sentence, by the way, today is Tuesday might go in parentheses. That's what they're doing here. But it's not a side thought. It's fundamental to his point. The word is near you. Why would you mark off? Let me get rid of this. I'm not sure why you would mark off. If the point is that the word is near you, that's a fundamental point. The word is near you in your mouth and in your heart. And then what you confess with your mouth. Look at the parallelism. The word is near you in your mouth and in your heart. You can see why he framed it this way. That if you confess with your mouth, Jesus as Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you can see that nice, neat parallelism there. That's what he's doing. But this point here is fundamental to the point that the word is near you. It's not way up there that you have to go chase it down. He's alluding to I think Leviticus here. It's not way below the earth that you have to go find it. The word has been brought to you in the person of Christ, the incarnate Christ. That's his point. And that means that this part about who will go into heaven. Oh, I see why they did it. Who will go into heaven is there, sort of, in Leviticus 5. Paul then does commentary on the point that you would have to bring him down. But you just say that. You don't need the parentheses. Or who will descend into the abyss, that you should have to bring Christ up from the dead. And then you get rid of the ambiguous, the confusing parentheses. It's worth talking about, because what are they doing there? They're leading you to believe that the point is somehow less important. It's not really important to Paul's point. That's parentheses kind of function like that. You can do without them. A lot of people read that way. Scan readers will read that way. They just skip the parts in parentheses because they're in English, parentheses mean less important or something like that. You don't put something important. Now you might put it in parentheses if you're saying this is critically important. Let me say this, and this is critically important in parentheses, and then say your critically important thing. Right? You might do that, but you don't put critically important stuff as a parentheses. And this is important to his point, in my view. I understand the confusion. Anyway, it's said, okay. Well, okay. No, I think it's worth talking about, because what are they doing? Yeah. Yeah. Because what are they doing there? It begs the question, why is this in parentheses? And in fact, I've heard people refer to all of Romans 9 through 11 as a big parentheses. And when you do that, you're implying that it can be skipped. Right? One quarter of Paul's teaching in Romans can just be skipped because it's a parentheses.
I look at it as, we bring Christ down from heaven, we can't get to heaven.
Right.
Christ
Exactly.
Savior. And Christ doesn't live and he's not dead.
Right.
He's living. And the word faith, basically the gospel is
Yeah.
the picture.
And we don't need
So I don't
to.
have any understanding, I don't have any confusion
Yeah.
on what it's saying there, so.
Yeah. And nor do we need to, because it's been brought near you and it's in your mouth and in your heart. Let me just see where we stand here with wonder who just left. That was weird. Okay, let's get back to it. But it's a good point, in my view. And I love talking about that stuff. So anyway, that's the gospel proclamation in Acts, remembering that Paul is writing this at the close of his third missionary journey when he's doing exactly this. He's been proclaiming this gospel in the synagogues and the marketplaces of the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire. I was going to say something about this. What was I going to say about this? Yeah, let's look at the proclamation for a second. And one thing to notice is it doesn't change in Acts. It's pretty consistent from speaker to speaker. It's not like Paul's proclamation sounds very different from Peter's. They're really the only ones that have extended gospel proclamations. Stephen's isn't really a proclamation at all. In fact, I don't think he doesn't mention the name of Jesus in his entire text of that he doesn't mention the name of Jesus till he sees him standing at the right hand of God. But here's the proclamations. You start in Acts 2. You can see right here, this man, says Peter, on the day of Pentecost, delivered over by the predetermined plan of foreknowledge of God. There's God in charge of it. You nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men, put him to death. But God, there it is, but God, there's two great words in the New Testament, raised him up again, vindicating him against his enemies and putting an end to the agony of death. Transcendent statement, since it was impossible for him to be held in his power. So there it is. The proclamation of resurrection and vindication against his enemies. Acts 7, this is Peter's, people call it a defense, it's more of an attack. But what did he finally see? What he saw was the resurrected Jesus. This is when Jesus finally enters into the narrative. And it does that typical Luke thing, Luke does. Stephen, gazed intently into heaven and saw the glory of God and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. So he says it, and then he has the speaker say it. And it's this dual emphasis. And he said, behold, I see the heavens open and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. It's just that neat dual thing there. But there it is again, the resurrected and victorious Messiah. Acts 10, Peter in front of Cornelius, the centurion in Caesarea, after the vision of the sheets coming down. Look at his proclamation. Jesus of Nazareth, Lord of all, there's Lord. Again, right there, just like Paul. God anointed him, they put him to death by hanging him on a cross, just like at the Pentecost proclamation. But God raised him on the third day. And there's the gospel again of the resurrection, the resurrected and victorious Messiah, who is then appointed by God as judge of the living and the dead. And there's the lordship again. Very consistent. Acts 13, this is Paul in Pisidian Antioch, I believe. Doesn't matter. It's in Galatia. Pisidian Antioch, there he is, yeah. Here it is again. He's talking to Jews, sons of Abraham's family, you who fear God, meaning Gentile, God-fearers. When they carried out all that was written concerning him, they took him down from the cross. So there's his death. But God raised him from the dead. Twice he raised up Jesus. And then he quotes the same text that Peter did on Pentecost, because you will not allow your Holy One to undergo corruption or decay. This is very, very parallel mirror of Peter's sermon in Acts 2. There's a lot of that. Peter's life in some sense is mirrored in Paul's as well. Acts 17 in Athens, this is his only proclamation to pagans. Athens, very, very pagan, city full of idolatry. He does not even mention the name of Jesus, I don't think, in this proclamation. His point of contact with them is the creation and the God of all. God is Lord of all. He has fixed, God overlooking the times of ignorance and declaring that all should repent, because he has fixed the day in which he will judge the world in righteousness through a man. He doesn't use the name Jesus. Interesting. Whom he has appointed, having furnished proof to all men by raising him from the dead. And there it is again. Acts 26, in front of Festus and Agrippa, just before he is going to head to Rome. The hope of the promise to the 12 tribes, let's see, by reason of his resurrection, that the Christ should suffer, very much like the way Jesus said it to the two on the road to Emmaus. Do you not understand? It wasn't necessary that the Christ would suffer, then enter into his glory. Here, by reason of his resurrection from the dead, he would be the first to proclaim light to both Jews and Gentiles. So once again, we have resurrection. It's a gospel of proclamation of resurrection. And that's all the sermons in Acts. They all have that common theme. And so when he says in Romans, written right in the middle of that action. Exactly what he says, that if you confess with your mouth Jesus as a Lord and believe in your heart, just like I've been saying all over the empire, in every synagogue, in every marketplace, and to anyone who would listen, that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Very, very consistent. What's interesting about that is there's this belief, fairly strong belief in secular scholarship, that the person who wrote Acts could not have known Paul. Because if they had known Paul, they would not have imagined his sermons, made up his sermons to sound the way that they did, because Paul was about these other things in his preaching. Well, that's just simply not true. It cannot get more. This book was written right in the middle of that. It's perfectly consistent with the sermons that with the proclamations that you see Paul deliver throughout his ministry, every one of them. That's a little heads up for you, those of you who like to talk about the gospel. Resurrection is good news, and it's good news that each and every one of us will participate in through faith. Extends the good news into our lives. We become reflections of that good news, instantiations of it, embodiments of it, so forth. Turns out resurrection is a transitive property, unlike omniscience, having all the knowledge that there is to have, or omnipotence, having all the power there is to have, or omnipresence, being in every place, having the all-seeing eyes, if you will. Those are not transitive properties. Our power, our seeing, and our knowledge is heavily, heavily constrained to a place and time and a scope. But turns out that by resurrecting Jesus from the dead, he was, in a sense, creating a new transitive property of himself. He has the property of resurrected being, and he will transfer that property, and indeed, in some sense, already has, to those who are his through faith. And so we already participate in that resurrection life in some way that's hard to understand, but that's the good news. If you're wondering what the good news is, that's how lovely are the feet of him who brings good news. That's the good news right here in this text. Okay, I beat that to death. Anybody want to say anything about that? That was all ad lib.
Well, basically, too, it comes down to the fact that if we didn't listen, that we could be saved.
And if you extend your thought, of course, Paul anticipates where you're going there in 1 Corinthians 15, then we are of all men most to be pitied. We believe the greatest lie in history, which a lot of people believe.
Well, the fact that God already promised that, so we can go back in his promise.
Yes.
Raise from the dead, so.
Yeah, the if-then nature of God's promises has no condition on it. If he promised, then he will deliver. That's exactly Paul's point with regard to Israel in chapters 10 and 11, 9, 10, and 11. He has promised, and so he will deliver. Okay. And I have us at about 18. That's a big summary, but I thought that was a couple of worthwhile diversions there. It always is nice. It always seems to me advantageous to put these. You don't want to read text like this in the abstract, because you end up turning them into abstract theological propositions. It's not abstract. It was spoken at a particular time and place, and we have a lot of knowledge and history of that time and place when he was speaking these things. And so we can put it in context, and we can look at this and compare it to what he was actually saying when he was writing this and thinking about it. The guy had a lot of time to think. You're asking, when did he have time to compose this? It's not when he started writing. I mean, this guy spent who knows how many hours, countless hours on those Roman roads, walking those paths, thinking. He's got Silas and others. Timothy's there. Silas is there. Hours and days of walking between, if you're going to walk from Antioch to Philippi, somebody can do that, but that's got to be That's gotta be 1,000 miles. No, it's not 1,000 miles, 1,000 miles to Rome. I don't remember, but it's, it's a huge number.
What you're trying to say is use a lot of time to think.
There's lots of time to think, yeah. Plus the Holy Spirit. Okay. Verse 18. Faith, verse 16, 17, faith comes from hearing and hearing by the word of Christ, which he's already explained to us, the word of his resurrection, basically. But I say, surely they have never heard, have they? They have not heard, have they? On the contrary, they, of course, being Israel, on the contrary, their voice has gone out into all the earth and their words to the ends of the world, end of the world. Who is they? And this, they here, this they is Israel. Right there. The topic of discussion. This day, there, right here, that's the voice of the heralds of the good news, of the proclamation. But I say, surely Israel did not know, did they? For Moses says, I will make you jealous with those who are not a nation. With a foolish nation, I will anger you. And Isaiah is very bold and says, I was found by those who did not seek me. I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me. But as for Israel, he says, I have spread out my hands all day long to a disobedient and obstinate people. And so you can see just by the block text here, the font, the transition to quote after quote after quote. And sometimes it's more than one place, well, more than one verse or piece of verse in the same quote. They did that. They would take some of this verse and some of that verse, and they would put them together to sharpen the fulfillment. We go back, Psalm 19. I don't know whether you need to go through all these, but some of them are interesting. Remember, is that Psalm 19? That's the Psalm 19. Oops. I got a few here. We'll go through them quick. Psalm 19, verses 1 through 4. The heavens are telling of the glory of God. It's amazing how we know the parts that it's interesting. The parts that we like to memorize are often not the parts that the New Testament writers quoted. So there's one. It's a great statement. The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech about him. Night to night reveals knowledge. There's no speech, nor are there words. There's no voice, but their line has gone through all the earth, their utterances to the ends of the world. In them, he has placed a tent for the sun, so on and so forth. So he's taking over. He's saying the heralds so manifest. What is he saying here? Because this is not about the gospel proclamation. This is about the heavens itself proclaiming its God, its creator, so that he is undeniable. And so he's drawing out that and applying it to the heralds and saying it's just the same way. Israel cannot say, surely Israel can say they never heard. Paul is saying it's as obvious to them as the creator is when you look at the expanse of the creation. And so he just simply applies the voice has gone throughout the whole world about the creator, and he's applying that to the heralds as well. No excuse for Israel, something like that. And if you're wondering, yes, they get to just do that. They get to just do that. And nobody would have had trouble with that. Nobody would have said, how can he do that? Hey, Paul, they weren't talking about the heralds of the gospel. They were talking about the creation testifying to the creator or something like that. How can you do that? And Paul says, well, I just did it. And he's not wrong. The point behind it being Israel cannot say they have not heard. Their rejection does not come from having, this common refrain today that we are always obsessed with about, what about the person who's never heard? Paul's point is precisely that. Israel cannot say that. Not only do they have the heralds, they have the prophets. And as Jesus said in one context, in one of his parables, let them listen to they have the prophets, let them listen to the prophets, Lazarus. He says, no, Lord, they're not gonna but if somebody comes back from the dead, then they'll listen. No, if they won't listen to the prophets, they're not going to listen even if somebody comes back, is raised from the dead. Which is exactly where we are. Somebody was raised from the dead. That news went out all over Galilee and Judea, and they rejected it. No excuse. Go back to that. Okay. All the earth, what is all the earth there? Their voice has gone out through over all the earth. Well, this is what it looked like at this point. At the end of the third journey, actually, I'm sorry, at the end of Acts, he's at the end of the third journey. The only thing left is Malta and Rome. But as we've already said, Rome already has the gospel. They already have a flourishing, mature church, almost from the inception of the Jerusalem church. But this has all happened. All of this right here has already happened. That's why he can say that. I have these two marked off, Arabia and Cilicia, in a different color because you don't see them show up in Acts. How Cilicia and Arabia received the gospel, we have no idea. It just simply appears there because those are the people, and there's going to be references to them. Well, no, I guess that's not true because they don't appear in Acts. We find out in Galatians that Paul went to Arabia. We can presume that he preached the gospel there. He went back to Cilicia after he got run out of Jerusalem the first time. We can presume that he preached the gospel there. But even in Antioch, we don't know how the gospel, it was just simply there because some people made their way from Cyrene and Cyprus or something like that. And it's just there. But the voice has gone out. From Paul's context and Paul's world, the voice has gone out.
A lot of the persecution in the church, and everybody scattered, Christians scattered and went out throughout the world. So
Yep.
they would have preached the gospel. Someone would have been started these churches before Paul even got there. So
Yeah, we don't know where about 9 of the 12 apostles in Acts, not counting Paul, we don't know where 9 of those 12, what happened to. They simply disappear. They never have any story in Acts at all. There's Peter, James, and John, and that's it. And the other 9, they just simply disappeared. But they didn't just disappear. They went someplace and did something.
When James, main James, they're talking about Acts, is actually Christ's brother, that brother, because James, John's brother, James, was the first one to be.
Yep.
That was sent out.
Yeah, James, the apostle.
He goes to what we talked about in Acts.
Yeah, you're right. He didn't have a ministry. Neither does John. John is with Peter, but he never does anything. He's just simply a companion of Peter. Peter does all the talking, kind of like Barnabas does, like Paul does with Barnabas. And James is just there until he is executed by Herod in chapter 12 to please the Jews. That's the story where now the Jews are really happy about that. I'm going to go get Peter and do the same thing. And then the angel shows up, wrecks his day. And then James, the brother of Jesus, he's the guy that appears in the council in chapter 15 as the leader of the church in Jerusalem. He will be stoned by the chief priest, Ananias, the one you see at the end of Acts. He will be stoned by that guy in the 60s, for which the high priest himself will be assassinated. Intrigue, just before the Jewish war that started in 66 AD. Okay, that's back to history. Let's move on before I get going on that. Finish on chapter 10 at least. Okay, back to the text, unless anybody has something more to say. So they don't have that excuse, like they never got the news. They did get the news. It happened right in their midst, right? It happened right in front of their face. The resurrection did. So Paul says it again. Well, surely Israel did not know, did they? Well, first Moses says, I will make you jealous with those who are not a nation. With the foolish nation, I will anger you. So there's this higher plan of God in he's getting to the point. There's a higher plan of God in the rejection by Israel of its Messiah. Because that Messiah will be accepted by the nations, which is what's happened now with the voice going out into all the earth. And we just saw the slide of what's happened in the eastern provinces and then far beyond. But then that will be used as a vehicle for Israel. He'll get there in a minute. Deuteronomy, he's quoting always here, Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 15 and following. This is right at the end. Deuteronomy 32 is only 34. There are 34 chapters. Yeah. 34 chapters. So this is just before Moses' death. It's the song of Moses. It's awful harsh. They have acted corruptly toward him. They are not his children because of their defect, a perverse and crooked generation. Harsh stuff. But down here farther, what did I quote here? Where is it? Oh. Yeah, so it keeps going. They have made me, back to the perverse generation, sons in whom there is no faithfulness. There is nothing in whom there is no faithfulness. They have made me jealous with what is not God, meaning idols. They have provoked me to anger with their idols. He's talking about his own people here. In return, reversal, I will make them jealous with what is not a people. You made me jealous with no God. I will make you jealous with no people. Because he will now pull from among the nations a people for his own name. And that pulling from among the nations will provoke Israel to jealousy. That's the thinking here. I will provoke them to anger with the foolish nation. You can understand why eventually at the end of chapter 11, he's going to say something like this. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and unfathomable his ways. Who could have figured it out? Nobody. But Paul has quoted, I think I have a slide on this. Let's pull out all these quotes. Somewhere. I didn't delete it. I think I did delete it. Huh, I deleted it. I almost never delete slides because why? Just don't look at them. But he's quoted in this section, 9 through 11, he's quoted Hosea, Isaiah 4 times, the Psalms, Leviticus, Joel, Deuteronomy, in a section that a lot of people think is a parentheses. It's the most heavily laden with Old Testament texts of anything that Paul wrote. Because he's dealing with the question of Israel. What about Israel? And he expects these people to be able to be familiar with these texts, because he's not explaining it, he's just quoting it. He's expecting them to understand it. It's extraordinary. There's a high regard for what the Roman church, how mature the Roman church is. It's funny, his most sophisticated statement of the gospel, his most sophisticated statement of the gospel, Ephesians is very sophisticated in its theology. But his most sophisticated statement of the gospel is to a probably overwhelmingly, or largely at least, Gentile church that he has never visited, and that we don't even know how the gospel got established there. And one that for probably 10 years, there were no Jews in. There's no Jews in this church from 46 when Claudius kicked them out of Rome until 54, 8 years. Those formative years, there were no Jews there to educate any Gentiles about the prophets or anything in the Old Testament. But here they are showing up in 57, a mere 3 years later. Nero took the throne became emperor in 54, would have rescinded Claudius's decree. The Jews come back, but by then it's a mature church, and he just knows expects them to know, and they do. Humbling. Isaiah again, I was found by those who did not seek me. I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me. Why? Because my people, the reason I did that is because my people abandoned me. So I turned to the nations. Using that abandonment by Israel of their God, then turning and calling a people for his name from among the nations. Israel has been favored in its opportunity to know. That's the one thing they do not have an excuse on, whether or not they knew, since the days of Moses, 1400 years, and has since that time been obstinate. That's the word he's going to use there in verse 21. We'll get there in a second. Israel made God jealous with what is not a God. God will make Israel jealous with what is not a people. But the history of Israel's disobedience resulted in the inclusion of the Gentiles. Oh, the depth of the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God. Israel rejected, this is me thinking about it, Israel rejected the gospel precisely because it did know the message about Christ, the Christ, not because it didn't know the message. What they didn't understand is not that. What they didn't understand is that righteousness could not be obtained through law keeping, because the law always brings condemnation. That was their only claim to ignorance. Paul makes the same claim for himself. But on the Christ, they did have the message. Isaiah is very bold. Let's see. Another thought on that, I was just thinking about this morning. Paul was in his own zeal, Philippians 2. In his own zeal, is it 2? 3? Here, don't make it up. Yeah. Circumcised the 8th day of the nation of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin, Hebrew of Hebrews. As to the law, a Pharisee, enough said. Be able to call yourself a Pharisee in regard to the law. As to zeal, a persecutor of the church. As to the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. If anybody could say, I did it, I kept it, Paul could have said it, and he couldn't say that because he thought that's where righteousness was obtained. He becomes then, in a sense, Israel personified. Israel's mistake, Israel's zeal and its mistakes personified. He represents all of that. And then God entered the picture and he was converted. And now he throws that zeal away from the law and towards the Christ in whom righteousness is found. And then we get all of this.
So is Israel's feeling that they could be righteous by keeping the law? Because they were thinking that putting too much importance on man and conditions, right?
Without question, pride comes into it. There was after the exile, there was this, remember, they went into exile because, it's funny, they fell off the horse the other way. They went into the exile because they ignored Moses. You turned away, Israel, you turned away from the law. The blessings of the covenant are accessed through Moses. And I gave you a way to handle it when you messed it up, right? The sin offerings and so on and so forth. I gave you everything you needed. You turned your back on that. And then when you went into exile, you went the other way. And Moses became absolutely everything. And we see that statement in chapter 15 of Acts about the Gentiles. Unless they are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, they cannot be saved. So they went the other way. They misunderstood both sides, on both sides of the exile. They misunderstood Moses' place. beforehand, he was the only way you get to keep the blessings of the covenant. And afterward, he was the only way. They didn't recognize that God had made a change. And now Moses had been, in a sense, superseded by the prophet like Moses, who was always promised. They didn't see that either. So they missed it both sides. It's a real tragedy.
I have a neighbor named Ian, who's a, she runs up there. But he showed me. Jewish, right? There are people online. And he doesn't, he's not a messianic. It just amazing how much importance you put on your writings. It's like it was people with the Bible.
Yes. Yeah, that's the tradition. That's the traditions. That's exactly where the Pharisees indicted Jesus, the point that the Pharisees indicted Jesus on. Why do your disciples not obey the traditions of the elders? And that's precisely where Jesus rejected. Their obedience didn't count for anything. Not only did they misdirect their devotion, by doing so, they undermined the law itself. And he gets into that too in the woes passage. Woe to you, Pharisees. You tithe like this, but then you do these, you completely ignore mercy and justice. I don't remember how that goes, but which is what the law is all about. It's completely misunderstand it, and you undo it with your traditions.
Well, basically, the tradition changed the laws. I mean,
Yeah.
basically, he goes through a passage in 16 or so, and he says, if a child was curses his mother and father, he's supposed to be stoned. That's said in the Old Testament, you stone that child. Well, they said if you bring pendants, money to the to the temple, then you don't have to and they basically all the traditions just change the laws.
Yeah, whatever.
It's more man's way of saying things instead of God's way of saying.
Yeah, he says whatever you think, you say, whatever, hey parent, whatever was owed you by the law has now been superseded because I did this over here. And you therefore cancel out the law. That was that, and it's self-serving. It's self-affirming in keeping these people in the social and religious status that they have in society. It's designed for them to benefit from. Because of course, if you don't have the money, you can't do these things.
They took over the people's house, instead of helping them.
Yes.
They changed everything. 700 traditions changed everything the law. They didn't follow the laws, and even though they claim they did, they made it so with man's laws instead of God's laws.
And then one step further, they made it impossible for the people. They became barriers to the people themselves, also experiencing the blessings of the covenant through the law. Okay, let's see. We won't bother to look at the Isaiah passage. I make the point. He quotes Isaiah a lot, 4 times by name. He specifically names Isaiah. And then the last one, verse 21, as for Israel, he says, I have spread out my hands all day long to a disobedient and obstinate people. Isaiah chapter 65, maybe we'll go ahead and look at that one. 65:2. Permitted myself to be sought by those who did not ask for me. Permitted myself to be found by those who did not seek me. I said, here I am, here I am. To a nation which did not call on my name, I have spread out my hands all day long to a rebellious people who walk in the way which is not good, following their own thoughts, like people who continually provoke me to my face, so on and so forth. Sit among graves, unclean. Spend the night in secret places. Eat swine's flesh, unclean. Broth of unclean meat is in their pots. There's that word again. That's his summary statement for where Israel is. And he's applying it to Israel here. We'll get back to Deuteronomy 9, maybe next week, but we're finishing off 10 this week. And the stubbornness, we'll find in Deuteronomy 9 that the stubbornness started as early as the wilderness. 3 days after the crossing of the sea, it was already manifesting itself. Actually, you don't even need to say that. They rebelled against Moses when they were still in Egypt. It didn't even take that long. And then Paul, of course, was rejected by Hellenistic Jews across the eastern provinces. Part of the point of reporting the work in the synagogues is to report his rejection by the Hellenistic Jews in the synagogues. That's why they're there. That's one of the reasons that Luke reports that. So if the pagan world is without excuse for its idolatry, Israel is without its, that's chapter 1. Israel is without its excuse for its unbelief. That's chapter 10. All the world, chapter 3, is accountable. No one. That's the great statement. We'll close with this. Go back to chapter 3. The great statement. I'm in the wrong version. So we got the stuff memorized, not because I set out to memorize it. I just been reading Romans so many times right now. Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that every mouth, the Jews would have naturally thought that the Gentiles' mouths would be closed, not theirs, but every mouth may be closed in all the world, not just Gentiles, but Jews, opposite of what the Jews would have thought. Not all the world, Jews, Gentiles first. No, all the world. We already know the Gentiles are without excuse. The point of the law is to make the Jew without excuse. They become accountable to God because by the works of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight. For through the law comes the knowledge of sin. Level playing field. Everybody's equal. Because God has brought low the Jews. Okay, 10:15, we'll stop there. What do we got left here? Oh, we still got everybody. Hello, everybody. On the Zoom feed. We're going to close down now.
Hello.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Well, that was quick. Had a little picture.
Our feed kept breaking up.
Oh. All right, I'm going to go ahead and, hey, Holly, are you going down to Covenant Life today?
No.
Okay. All right, I'll see you guys later.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Gary.
Yep, see ya.